Today on Ag News Daily.
For many years, we just used a single mode. I think you probably know the one I'm talking about. And, before that, we used a single mode in soybeans. Well, those weeds quickly develop resistance when we're throwing one tool at it. We start throwing a lot of tools, the weeds are off balance, and it's still tougher for them to develop a resistance against that.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show in studio.
In studio, you're very lively today.
I feel good to be home.
Yeah, no kidding. After you've been on the road for the last 7 weeks?
18 different airplanes.
Ugh. And then you went on vacation, which was fun. The weather was nice. Still good to be home.
It is. And after my much-needed break, there was a much-needed rain for some of our drought-stricken areas in the Delta and the Mid-South. Parts of the Midwest also saw a little bit of relief, but the plains are staying mostly dry. We've got some upcoming systems that are expected to continue missing parts of the western and high plains. While early March is typically dry, the key window for moisture recovery now starts in April through June. Farmers will be keeping a close eye on across the plains into the Midwest and Great Lakes region. They'll be bracing for strong winds that we're experiencing right now into the weekend. Gusts could be 40 to 60 miles per hour. Temperatures will remain above normal, but normal storm systems will be moving through the Midwest over the next few days. Could bring rain, snow, strong winds, and even the potential for a couple of severe blizzards with conditions in some areas that will create some volatility. The rain and storms ahead could help ease the drought conditions and might be just in time for spring planting. So we'll continue to take a look at that. And we'll be back with some news right after this break.
You wouldn't shave half your face.
Oh no.
Or chop down half a tree. So why leave weeds half finished? Cairo Herbicide from Corteva Agriscience delivers complete control with a novel triple-action premix formula, the ultimate application flexibility, and season-long protection against tough weeds. Cairo Herbicide. Going all the way is the only way. Visit Corteva.us/complete.
Well, Tanner, I should have brought a cake for this episode. Do you know why?
I have no idea.
It is our 9-year anniversary of the podcast. This year, we're celebrating 9 years of Ag News Daily. So thousands of episodes later, 2 years now into video, thanks to Tanner for that great idea. It's been full of great memories. Tanner, you've been with us for a few years now. What are some of your favorite moments on the podcast?
I still won't forget being in New Orleans and doing some of those first interviews, some man on the street type interviews. Those have been really good, but it's just neat to find those headlines that I wouldn't have ever learned about besides this. Well, Delaney, what have been some of your favorite memories?
Just being on with you, Tanner.
I figured.
Well, we appreciate all of you for tuning in with us for the last 9 years. Here's to another 9. But switching into some more serious headlines, the Iran conflict is something, of course, we're continuing to watch here on Ag News Daily. American Farm Bureau Federation's economist Faith Parham says countries around the Persian Gulf account for nearly half of the world's urea exports and about 30% of global ammonia exports. With fertilizer shipments and roughly 20% of the world's petroleum moving through the Strait of Hormuz, any disruptions to shipping lanes raise costs and supply concerns for farmers worldwide. Industry leaders say keeping shipping lanes open is key, as rising insurance costs and shipping risks could tighten supplies. Farmers are already seeing higher prices, with some phosphorus prices doubling and nitrogen up about 15% from a year ago. And it's interesting, you could see that kind of happening in real time as that Iran conflict continued to unfold. Groups like the Missouri Corn Growers Association and Minnesota Farmers Union say fertilizer costs have increased sharply in recent weeks, adding as much as $40 to $50 per acre to corn production in some areas. With fertilizer moving through a global marketplace, economists warn markets could remain volatile through planting season as geopolitical tensions continue. The Renewable Fuels Association says now may be the right time to expand the use of American-made ethanol in light of that situation. In a letter to the Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, RFA CEO Jeff Cooper said allowing broader sales of E15 could add billions of gallons of lower-cost fuel to the market and help shield consumers from global supply shocks. This group is also urging the EPA to issue emergency summertime waivers so E15 can be sold nationwide, saying the move could provide quick relief at the pump, and certainly at the pump has been a huge shift here over the last few weeks, Tanner.
Well, yes, in that regard, we're seeing E15 updates. Legislation that would allow for this year-round sale of E15 fuel nationwide has stalled in Washington, D.C. Despite broad support from farm groups, ethanol producers, and even some of the refiners. Jan Tinbensol, who serves on the Nebraska Corn Board and Nebraska Corn Growers Association Board, says disagreements among refiners and political strategy has slowed this bill's progress, leaving farmers and ethanol supporters caught in the middle. Tinbensol also said that supporters are still hopeful, though, that Congress will move this legislation forward, but the next step would require the U.S. House of Representatives and the United States Senate to bring the measure up for a vote. Meanwhile, a new poll from Rural Voices USA found strong support for the policy, with 71% of farm families in the Midwest states saying they are more likely to support candidates who back year-round E15. With an election year, which I feel like is every year, but with an election year ahead of us, that's important.
It certainly is. We also saw some updates on renewable diesel policies as well. A recent analysis shared last week by Terrain showed uncertainty around federal biofuel policy is slowing down growth in the renewable diesel industry and weakening demand for soybean oil, a key feedstock made, of course, from U.S. soybeans. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, renewable diesel production fell about 10% in 2025 as producers waited for clearer guidance on new tax credits and biofuel rules. In the meantime, some plants have shifted toward imported feedstocks like used cooking oil and animal fats instead of using domestically produced soybean oil for their production. Policy clarity expected here in 2026 should come from the EPA, the U.S. Department of Treasury, and the Internal Revenue Service, which could help renewable diesel production rebound and restore soybean demand. Stronger biofuel demand typically boosts, of course, soybean crushing, which can strengthen local cash basis for farmers near those processing plants. But analysts say that the outlook will depend really heavily on federal tax credit rules as state programs like California's Air Resources Board's low carbon fuel standard.
What is that acronym?
That was a long one, which currently favors lower carbon imported feedstocks over domestically produced soybean oil.
I was trying to figure out what the acronym for was as you read that.
I don't know if I could get that one put together.
Nope. Well, we'll stay focused on soybeans. A new report that was released late last week from the Crop Production Network showed that soybean diseases reduced North American yields again in 2025, with an estimated 216.5 million bushels lost across the United States. Soybean cyst nematode, they are remaining as the leading cause of soybean losses, while sudden death syndrome caused about 49.3 million bushels in losses, the highest level since 2014. Another emerging concern is red crown rot that jumped sharply, accounting for about 7.7 million bushels lost in 2025 compared to just over 120,000 the year before. I know we saw a lot of that at Commodity Classic fungicides and protectants there. Researchers are saying the soil-borne diseases carry a major challenge for soybean growers, especially in the northern production account, which accounts for 80% of the U.S. disease losses. Overall, 4.8% of potential soybean production was lost to disease in 2025. Weather conditions, including warmer temperatures, periods of wet soils, have created those favorable conditions for some pathogens. Experts are finding highlights that are important for early season disease management and seed protection strategies as farmers are planning for 2026 and their growing season. Now let's hear a tip as we get into this growing season from Ron Geiss of Corteva Agriscience for this episode's tip with Corteva Agriscience.
Just like you can't keep your cows in the pasture when there's a hole in the fence, I think of our nitrogen system is just about the same. There's a hole in the nitrogen system, too much moisture, and the nitrogen leaves the system. So I'm going to have a tip to include Instinct with your liquid or your manure applications or your dry fertilizer, or N-Serve where you're using anhydrous ammonia to block that hole, to patch that fence. so that nitrogen keeps on your field and keeps available for the plant so that you're going to have the highest yield potential and profit potential going out in there on your cornfields. So for more information, go to nitrogenstabilizers.com to learn more.
Well, Tanner, now transitioning into some ag policy news, there's a growing debate over pesticide regulations as it is becoming a key issue in negotiations over the next federal farm bill. Lawmakers are considering provisions that would limit the state's ability to set their own pesticide labeling rules and shield manufacturers from certain lawsuits if products are used according to federal guidelines from the U.S. EPA. Supporters say the changes would help ensure farmers maintain access to important crop protection tools, including glyphosate, while critics argue the measures could weaken consumer protections and limit legal options for people claiming health impacts. The issue is also playing out in the courts. There is a 15-state coalition urging the Supreme Court of the United States to uphold national labeling standards in the case Monsanto Company versus Darnell. The coalition argues a patchwork of state labeling rules, such as those in California, could disrupt supply chains, increase costs for farmers, and potentially limit access to tools like glyphosate and other crop protection products. So we'll continue to see how this headlines plays out, but I don't think it's going to be a fast resolve.
Well, you've already seen an update on our social media this week, but the House Ag Committee has advanced the Farm, Food, and National Security Act of 2026 with a bipartisan vote of 34-17 after an overnight markup late last week that included debate on nearly 100 amendments.
That's a lot of amendments.
The committee chairman, Glenn Thompson, led the Republican-backed proposal with 7 Democrats joining Republicans to move that bill forward. Supporters, including the American Farm Bureau Federation, say that this legislation updates farm and nutrition programs that have not been fully reauthorized since the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018 and provides some much-needed support as farmers face economic pressures. Lawmakers also rejected an amendment that would have allowed year-round sales of E15 fuel. That bill now heads to the House leadership for a potential floor vote. Meanwhile, the Senate Agricultural Committee is expected to work on its own version of the Farm Bill later this spring as the current extension approaches its September deadline.
2018 doesn't seem that long away or that long ago, but it almost 10 years ago that we've had the same farm bill. So
it's wild.
It is. But lawmakers in D.C. this week are debating whether a potential war funding package requested by President Trump could also include some relief for farmers. According to reports coming out of D.C., Republican lawmakers are considering adding wildfire aid and up to $15 billion in tariff relief for agriculture. Though congressional aides say no final decision has been made, and some House Republicans are cautious about the package becoming too large. Meanwhile, pressure is growing from farm groups as higher fuel and fertilizer prices tied to the conflict strain farm budgets. U.S. Senator John Boozman, chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, says additional federal assistance may be needed. Senator Boozman told reporters many producers are facing rising costs for diesel, gas, and fertilizer, warning that without help, some farmers could struggle to remain profitable this season. And certainly as we look at farm bankruptcies, that is up quite substantially here year over year already.
Well, the meatpacking industry is under scrutiny again. Senate Democrats are pushing legislation to break up the dominant U.S. meatpacking companies in an effort to boost competition, lower grocery store prices, and support farmers and ranchers in the end. Minority Leader of the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer, introduced the Family Grocery and Farmer Relief Act, which would limit large processors to a single major meat type and cap market concentration in the beef sector. The Federal Trade Commission would be the one to enforce the rules and could require companies to divest plants or business units that exceed these limits. Well, now supporters are saying the bill targets the market power of the largest meat companies and aims to ease rising food prices. Critics are warning, though, that splitting operation could disrupt supply chain and push costs higher for consumers. The proposal comes as beef prices remain high and scrutiny grows over the consolidation of the U.S. meat packing industry. So it'll be interesting to see where and how that advances, Delaney.
And I do wonder, to that end, if you force these folks to split up, do we have other smaller plants ready to step in and take up some of that market share? But looking at New World screwworm, the U.S. is continuing to ramp up efforts to prevent that entering into the United States. Secretary Rollins is working to expand the sterile fly production to protect livestock, as a new facility at the Moore Air Base in South Texas is expected to double output, providing more flexibility for fly dispersal to stop the pest before it crosses the border. The facility is being built with the oversight from the Army Corps of Engineers, and full operations are expected to begin in about 18 months. The USDA has also adjusted its sterile fly dispersal strategy in northern Mexico based on updated risk data from its research partners. Meanwhile, the FDA issued an emergency use authorization for F10 antiseptic wound spray with insecticide to treat and prevent infestations in cattle, horses, and certain wildlife, ensuring both livestock and public health are protected as the agency moves to contain this threat.
We've got news coming out of South Dakota, Delaney. South Dakota has temporarily banned the sale, distribution, and manufacture of cell-cultured protein products. We saw the governor there, Larry Roden, sign the measure into law this week, which takes effect July 1st and expires in June of 2031. Violations would be considered a misdemeanor. The law is a compromise, protecting traditional livestock producers while allowing limited non-meat uses and avoiding a permanent ban. The South Dakota Cattlemen's Association said the temporary pause eases concerns about market retaliation and costly litigation. Similarly, though, laws have passed in at least 7 other states, including Alabama, Florida, and Texas, with varying durations from 2 to 5 years, reflecting now growing state-level debate across alternative protein products over the uses and distribution of those.
Well, as we look at some trade headlines here, the U.S. and the UK agricultural officials met last week at a Virginia beef farm to highlight growing beef trade between the two countries following, of course, the new bilateral trade agreement. NCBA President Gene Copenhaver said the event showcased U.S. cattle production and strengthened ties between producers in both countries. The meeting comes as the first U.S. beef shipments under the new U.S.-UK trade deal reach British markets since the agreement was made last May of 2025. Expanding opportunities for American beef after years of negotiations and industry outreach is certainly an accomplishment that many in the beef industry are excited to celebrate, Tanner.
Well, from beef to pork, the National Pork Board has wrapped up their National Pork Industry Forum that was happening last week. They had more than 100 producers passing advisements on pork quality and swine health. The delegates, who also set the checkoff assessment rate, determined return to state percentages and recommended board members for appointment by the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. It was a busy meeting, and we hear from the NBP president, Gordon Sprunk. The CEO, David Newman, emphasized a 3-year strategic plan that was aimed at boosting the long-term value of pork, strengthening the industry, and improving the lives of pigs and people. Specifically, the National Swine Health Strategy is designed to reduce domestic disease impacts and keep foreign and emerging diseases out, with the producer involvement being critical to the success of this plan. So a lot of good things came out of that meeting.
Certainly, but as we switch tracks to look at equipment sales, U.S. tractor sales fell 12% in February, with just over 9,800 units sold compared to 11,000 last year, according to the latest Association of Equipment Manufacturers report. Smaller tractors under 100 horsepower saw the biggest declines, while 4-wheel drive tractors were up 11%. Combine sales were down for the month, but are up 15% year-to-date through February. Looking to our neighbors to the north in Canada, tractor sales also dipped in February, while combine sales jumped 85% year-to-date.
Wow.
AEM Senior Vice President Kurt Blades says farmers are weighing capital purchases very carefully amid changing commodity prices and interest rates, but long-term demand for modern, productivity boosting equipment still remains strong. And I'm sure that was the sentiment you saw at Commodity Classic as well, as we see a lot of those big machinery pieces rolling out on the floor.
Yeah, certainly changing times. But Delaney, have you ever heard someone call weeds a thief?
Well, little teaser for what's ahead, I think.
Continuing the conversation that we shared from last week in the Tips with Corteva Agriscience series, Ron Geiss, the market development specialist, shares some key tips on what farmers should know heading into this growing season. Let's talk to Ron right now.
I want to dig into one tip you mentioned just a little bit more, which is weed management. Having a plan in place for weed management is also a great tip that I think you can share with our listeners today. How would you approach that?
Delaney, weeds are nothing but low-life scum thieves. They take nutrients, they take water, they take sunlight, they take from the crop directly. Just nothing but a common thief. So I just soon not have the thief there. And it just, if it is there, it just makes the crop have to work harder. So I like to have an integrated approach to weed control, and that's going to include starting clean. So if you are in no-till, starting clean typically means using a burn-down herbicide. That'd be no-till, strip-till, ridge-till, anytime there's weeds out there. Or tillage. I mean, tillage is pretty popular in north central Iowa. But eliminate the weeds that germinated in October, November, February, March. Let's start with a clean slate. And then at that same time, we typically will apply a pre-emerge herbicide or an early pre-plant, something that's giving us residual control that's going to take us into, I'm going to frankly say into the month of June would be ideal. And then in June, we need to kill the escapes. Now here, let me point something out. Our residual herbicide is probably 95% effective. We consider that pretty good control. Okay, what about the 5% escapes? We need to time our post-emerge application to address those few escapes. Let's not be thinking we time our post-emerge application once our residual is totally gone. Then we got a huge flush to manage. No, we want to manage the escapes and put more residual to keep those fields clean. And those provide the cleanest fields where we're early on that post-emerge application. And then another key point is every time we go across that field, we want to use multiple herbicide modes of action, to keep these weeds off balance. For many years, we just used a single mode. I think you probably know the one I'm talking about. And, before that, we used a single mode in soybeans. Well, those weeds quickly develop resistance when we're throwing one tool at it. We start throwing a lot of tools, the weeds are off balance, and it's still tougher for them to develop a resistance against that. And there's plenty of resistance out there, so we want to keep those weeds off balance. So we all know that spring can be busy and tough, and the weather's sometimes tough to cooperate. So we still want some of these residuals that give us some flexibility. So we look at things like our some of our corn herbicides. We have the ability to go pre or post. Soybean herbicides, not usually so much. Usually your pre-emerge soybean herbicides are pre-emerge only. So I guess with that in mind, let's maybe discuss, I'd like to discuss 3 new products that we're bringing into the market here over the last year or two. One in corn is Resicor Rev. So with Resicor Rev, we've got, we revved up our Resicor product. What we've done is we've encapsulated the acetochlor and changed the mix a little bit. So we've got 3 modes of action within one product. Resicor Rev has chlorpyrrolid, has mesotrione, and has that encapsulated acetochlor. And what it delivers is up to 8 weeks of residual control on, we'll say 75 of our toughest weeds and grasses. It gives us the flexibility to tank mix just about any fertilizer out there. Earlier I mentioned the sulfur, Delaney. And sulfur as a liquid form, it's an easy way to put it on, but the problem is it's very difficult to get any herbicides to mix. And we've had good results with Resicor Rev mixing with sulfur fertilizer, even when sulfur makes up half of that mix. So that's a real advantage as a pre-emerge. Post-emerge, of course, it gives us the flexibility to go up to 24-inch tall corn with the Resicor Rev. So anywhere from before planting up to 24-inch tall corn, one product can get you through that way. Go to soybeans, 2 new offers there. Kyver Pro, we brought that into the market a year ago. or two. It's as a reformulated product. It's got 3 active ingredients. Each of the 3, independent of each other, are really strong on water hemp or Palmer amaranth. So the combination is it's a very solid water hemp, Palmer amaranth type of material. So what we look at there is apply that before the beans are up. We'll typically say pre-plant up to 3 days after planting, just to make sure the beans aren't up. And that's giving us 6 weeks of residual, sometimes longer when the weather cooperates, and a real powerhouse pre-emerge product. And then finally, our new soybean offer, Sonic Boom. So a lot of people are familiar with Sonic. Sonic contains the sulfentrazone, which is really strong on water hemp. That's in Sonic Boom. But the boom part of Sonic Boom is metribuzin. And metribuzin has been around a long time, but it still gives us really good broadleaf control and has not had the weed resistance associated with it. What I really like about Sonic Boom, though, is it's formulated, Delaney, as a co-crystal. So think of it, instead of 2 ingredients, 2 different molecules, 2 different water solubilities, it's essentially formulated as, think of it as one molecule that has sort of a medium solubility. And what that does for the customer is it keeps it higher in the soil profile where water hemp and Palmer amaranth germinate. That's a +1, a little better results from it than you would have just mixing those ingredients. But number 2, because it keeps it as a lower solubility, the product's not down there in the root system of the soybeans. So there's a better crop safety profile when we can keep the chemical out of the soybean roots. And so the thing that's plagued metribuzin in the past has been a little tough on the beans. We've had several instances through last year's testing where we saw much better crop safety, and that's exciting us about Sonic Boom.
Ron, so many great tips from you today. If any of our listeners want to go find some additional tips or resources for themselves, where should they go to find more information?
Well, we always like to direct you back to our website, corteva.com/US. And then also encourage you to go talk to your local retailer, or you could even get a hold of your crop protection representative as well.
Well, Delaney, Ron's one of my favorites from the Corteva team. A lot of great folks there. But now I think it's time to jump into markets. So what's been happening this week?
Certainly, a lot of things are casting some shadows on the markets this week, as we saw the March 2026 WASDE report from USDA showing U.S. corn, soybean, and wheat ending stocks for the 25-26 season largely unchanged from last month. Soybean imports and crush were raised 5 million bushels due to stronger domestic meal demand, but ending stocks stayed steady. Market reactions were pretty minimal. And analyst Corey Bratland says attention is now shifting to the U.S.-Iran conflict, energy prices, and some of those key reports that we will see later this month on March 31st, including the prospective plantings report and the quarterly grain stocks report, which gives us our first glimpse at acreage. Farmers are closely watching corn and soybean acreage decisions, especially as rising nitrogen costs could still affect planting plans. Cargill has paused soybean exports from Brazil to China and suspended purchases from Brazilian farmers after new inspection rules from the Brazilian government created some uncertainty on their trades front as well. So a lot of different factors pulling together here. Certainly weather is going to be top of mind, and we're going to need to get Eric Snodgrass on again really soon to chat about what that upcoming planting forecast looks like.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to believe in the news these days. Obviously, Twitter's probably not, X is probably not the number one source for that, but some interesting headlines on Brazilian soybeans there. If you're out and about on that app, go ahead and check those out. But keep tuned to us. If we get any news in the middle of the week, we'll still hit up our social media channels and share those with you. So make sure you follow there. Hit subscribe. We appreciate all the feedback that you can give us. But Delaney, for this week, what do you say?
Let's let him go.
Let's let you go.